In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless wasteland, and darkness covered the abyss, while the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters. Well, today I want to continue talking about St. John of the Cross. Today I want to talk about the spiritual canticle and the living flame of love. Now, I think if you had a chance to look at this at all, you have to admit that this is beautiful writing, beautiful literature. We can't exactly call it a book or books, but it is beautiful literature. And it's filled with a taste for God and the things of God. Now, I want to specifically pick out 3 different subjects that John of the Cross is talking about in the spiritual canticle and the living flame. He's talking about the presence of God. He's talking about God's communication with us. And then he talks about the living flame. Now he says, God is never absent from us. He is never absent. That is quite a statement, because I think, all of us, I think, that God comes and goes when I'm behaving myself. If I misbehave, then God is absent. I have cut him off from myself, and I think that by my sin, I have lost connection with God. He is not present to me, and therefore I am not present there to God. But John of the Cross says, God sustains every soul and dwells in it substantially, even though it be that of the greatest sinner in the world. Now, how many of us have ever pictured that reality, that God is in every sinner in the world, the greatest sinner in the world? God is not absent from that person. He sustains that person, and he has a substantial relationship with that person. What is a substantial relationship? Well, John of the Cross is a philosopher, and substance has a special meaning in Aristotelian philosophy. The substance of a thing is the thing that is the reality behind what you see, the thing that is behind the external manifestation. So it really is the essence of the thing. So that God, in his essence, is sustaining this soul of the sinner. And that makes us, wonder, how can that be that God is in the sinner? Is it by very definition we say that we have chosen of our own free will that we do not want to have anything with any relationship with God? Yet he is present to us, essentially, substantially. He is never absent. I can never say that God is away from me. In fact, I think that if we want to make this concrete, I think you can think of the 35,000 feet or so of oxygen around us. Well, God is much more than the oxygen, but just think that we are covered with this oxygen and this divine presence. He is there. And if he is in the center, then it begins to make us wonder, well, what about this reality of universal salvation? Now, you know from the past that this is my favorite topic, universal salvation. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and there's some real interest in this at the present time in the theological writings of people. And one author says that it was Therese of Lisieux that brought up the subject of universal salvation. She has made it a topic to be thought about today, because she was determined that she was going to pray for and to save the most terrible of all sinners. She wanted to have everybody saved. And so you look at the teaching of the church, you look at the concept of the development of doctrine, and I believe today that there is this concept of development of doctrine, and it is right in this very subject. There has been a development, and you see it in the writings of the popes, I believe, especially Pope Benedict. He, as I've said to you before, he was interested in this subject, and he was a great friend of Ben Balthasar, and Ben Balthasar was interested in the subject. So the two of them, I think, have made a contribution to our thought on the subject of universal salvation. The very fact that there is no place outside of God. There's no parallel universe. There's no parallel heaven. There's no parallel world. This is the one that was created by God. This is the one in which we live. This is the only one that is. And if God is in every single human being, and whether they're a sinner or not, there's nothing outside of this. Now, John Paul gave two conferences, I shouldn't call them conferences, two catecheses in his Wednesday audiences way back. And he gave one on heaven and on hell. And he makes it very clear that the afterlife can be quite different from the afterlife that we imagine and that we hear preached. Eternal, well, that's the eternal definition. I want to first talk about heaven. It is always necessary to maintain a certain restraint in describing these ultimate realities of heaven, since their depiction is always unsatisfactory. Today, personalist language is better suited to describing the state of happiness and peace that we will enjoy in our definitive communion with God. In the context of Revelation, we know that that happiness and heaven are where we are going, in which we will find ourselves is neither an abstraction or a physical place in the clouds, but a living, personal relationship with the Holy Trinity. So heaven is not a place up there, and all our beloved are not up in the clouds. Our loved ones are in a personal relationship with the most blessed Trinity. They are in a relationship with God, and I believe they are in a relationship with us. Pope Benedict says that love does not end with the grave, that we have a relationship with our loved ones, and we can continue to communicate with them because they are here with us. They're not up there on the clouds. Well, this is a little different depiction of heaven that we usually think of, because when somebody dies, we say that, oh yes, they're up there seeing all our relatives. They're up there doing this and that, and we imagine them really in a place with physical bodies. Well, as soon as we leave this body, the body is gone, and we are pure spirits. So there is this, it's not a place. There's no place to go to. Now, this is heaven. Well, what about hell? As soon as you mention to somebody anything about hell and universal salvation, they will immediately bring up Sister Josephus. It wasn't Josephus. Faustina, Sister Faustina, who had these visions of the damned, and that she had these frightful scenarios where she sees them and tells about how terrible it is. Well, I believe what she saw, which were private revelations, but what she saw have to be interpreted. And I believe what she saw was the horrors of war. These revelations were made at a time in history and the world had suffered the First World War, the Second World War, the atomic bomb, the Bosnian wars, the horrors of the Vietnam War, all these horrors. I believe that was the hell that she saw in these revelations that were given her. What she's describing really is the horror of war, and that is hell. But there is nothing beyond this world that would indicate that there's a place. If heaven isn't a place, then hell isn't a place. So this is what John Paul says about hell. Eternal damnation remains a real possibility, but we are not granted without a special divine revelation the knowledge of whether or which human beings are effectively involved in it. The thought of hell, and even less the improper use of biblical images, must not create anxiety or despair. But it is necessary to have a healthy restraint of freedom within a healthy a healthy reminder of freedom within the proclamation that the risen Christ has conquered Satan, giving us the Spirit of God who makes us cry, Abba, Father. So the notion of of hell as being a place, it does not seem to have any real basis. Hell is a separation from God, but always thinking that there is the possibility of purification and justice being satisfied, and that the final restoration of all things in Christ will be fulfilled. Now that's, I think, certainly part of the vision that St. John of the Cross presents to us in the spiritual canticle. He is talking about the presence of God, which is so real and so constant that we do not have to worry with anxiety and fear about our own relationship with God, but other relationship with God. When we look at terrible sinners are not separate from God, because there's no place to be separate from. God sustains them in existence. God is with them. And in God's providence, I believe there is this final restoration in Christ. Now, I would like to have a few comments about how does God communicate with us. Well, St. John of the Cross describes the act of contemplation as God's communication with us. He communicates with us through a visit. And he is using the spiritual canticle, which is modeled on the canticle of Solomon in the Old Testament. Solomon, the scripture scholars tell us Solomon is not the author of this beautiful part of scripture, but it embraces some thoughts that are in what is described as being written by Solomon. But what is really in this canticle of the Song of Songs is a love relationship, a nuptial love relationship between God and the soul, and God and the church. It is magnificent, and I believe that it is required reading for children in Spain, because it is such perfect Spanish. But here it is now, this magnificent poem about God's relationship with us, his communication with us. How does he communicate with us? Well, John of the Cross tells us that we have to go beyond all thought, idea, concept, imagining, memory, anything that we are holding on to. And he is saying that it should be nada, nada, nada. No thing, no thing, no thing. No created thing is going to be the means by which God is going to communicate with us. Well, if you take that back as far as it can go, this concept of God communicating us with no thing, you will eventually go back to the beginning of Genesis, when nothing exists except the hovering of the Spirit of God over the waters. Could it be that this hovering is the very act of contemplation? This touch the gentle touch of the wings of the Spirit of God. It's contemplation. It is no thing. It is it is before anything. It is God touching us and letting us experience it after the touch has continued its motion. When we can look back and say that to ourselves, that we have experienced something. God has in some way touched us. In some way, he has kissed us. In some way, he has embraced us through nothing except the hovering of his Spirit. The hovering of his Spirit has touched us, and we know in some way that God is with us. The reality of the presence of God within me is made manifest, is made apprehensible to my second thinking, beyond thinking, but a looking back and saying, yes, God did touch me then. And that is extremely, extremely valuable, because it is this touch that can give me the joy of life, that can give me some peace. And it is in some form of prayer that this hovering takes place, whether that be before the Blessed Sacrament, or before the crucifix, before an ocean, before a mountain, wherever we like to pray, this experience of the touch of God hovering over us, can give us the peace that we need. Everybody has a certain amount of pain in their life, and we all need some kind of help. And the divine touch, that divine reality that is the hovering of the Spirit of God, is extremely helpful. Now, the living flame of love. This is John of the Cross at his most beautiful. After you have experienced it all, and the soul in some way has been touched by God, and now it experiences, after years and years of suffering, and of years and years of being tried by God, and through prayer and through the sacraments of the Church, through leading a good Christian life, there is a point where the reality of the union with the soul and God becomes obvious to someone. And this is what John of the Cross is describing in the living flame of love. He has reached that point in his life after much, much suffering, after being imprisoned, after being terribly persecuted by his own confreres. He has been through it all, and now he's on the other side of all that pain and suffering. And you might say God gives him a respite. And if I remember when I don't remember exactly when we studied it, but the river Styx had a significance in our study of mythology. That you go through the river Styx, but on the other side, it becomes peaceful, it becomes joyful, it becomes paradisal. And I think that's what John the Cross is describing in this living flame of love. He has arrived at a state where God's love is so real to him that it is a burning flame. Now, a burning flame, you know, at the graves of some of the unknown soldier, there is a living flame there, a perpetual flame. And this is the states put these flames at these special places to show that we have respected this life. And I think that's what God does with this living flame of life. Living flame, God is rewarding his work in a particular soul. And John is describing the joy of being part of that divine plan in his life, where he now is experiencing tremendous love and tremendous peace and tremendous joy. Now, St. Teresa of Avila says that we are introduced to the seventh mansion by an intellectual vision of the Blessed Trinity. Now, an intellectual vision means that you somehow understand the Blessed Trinity. An intellectual vision is not, you don't see anything. An intellectual vision is a understanding something. Somehow, the most Blessed Trinity becomes real to you. And you know now that the Trinity is, and that the Trinity dwells within you. And then she says that in this seventh mansion, there are no longer any ecstasies. You don't go out of yourself. Ecstasy means that you go out of yourself. You leave the body, and the spirit is so strong in you that your body can't take it. So the spirit leaves the body. But in the seventh mansion, the spirit is and the body can live together. It's like our Blessed Mother when she had the incarnate Word within her womb. She was strong enough to take the divine reality, the divine presence, and she didn't collapse because she was sinless. She had no weakness, no human frailty, so therefore she could take the divine. Well, now in the seventh mansion, there are not any ecstasies. The soul can take the divine presence, and the body can take the divine presence. So there is a joy in the body and and the Spirit together with the divine presence, in the divine presence. And this is described by John as a living flame. It is a burning, joyful, ecstatic, not in the sense that we were using ecstatic before, but now in the sense of just plain happiness and joy. It's beautiful the way John of the Cross describes